It's time for today's culture then here on France 24, and her book, A Visit from the Goon Squad, won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, as well as a whole host of others. It's an ambitious study of memory and relationships written as a series of chapters with interlocking characters at different times in their lives. Her latest book, Black Box, was released phrase by phrase on Twitter. We met Jennifer Egan at Paris's Festival America and started by asking her about her unconventional and adventurous methods.
I feel like I'm willing to be as unconventional as I have to be to do what I'm trying to do, and I'm very curious about bending new technological forms to my purposes. That being said, I still also write very conventionally. It really depends on the piece. So the new novel that I'm working on, I had all kinds of crazy bells and whistles I thought would be appropriate to the material, and I found that it resisted every single one. They were really lame in the context of this book I'm working on, so I let all of that go, and what I've got right now for that work is basically naturalism. But with something like Black Box, which is a novella that I wrote in very small structural units and which was tweeted as well as printed in the US in the New Yorker magazine, I was really interested in the idea of creating a work that would thrive in these small structural units and could arrive in the intimacy of people's handsets via Twitter, one line at a time. In the case of this, which is like a spy story, told from the point of view of a female spy infiltrating a ring of powerful men who seem to have terrorist intentions toward the US, the action isn't narrated directly. She simply records what she learns from each thing that happens. So the action itself is a kind of negative space. It's suggested by these little lessons that she derives from each thing that occurs. And that's how we get a sense of what the story is.
And in A Visit from the Goon Squad, there is an extremely experimental chapter written entirely in PowerPoint. Where did that idea come from?
Well, A Visit from the Goon Squad is written in pieces that are all very different from each other in terms of like technical approach, mood, tone. They feel like they're all parts of different books. And that was my goal, to have them feel very different and read very differently and yet fuse into one thing, sort of like a concept album, let's say. I know that's kind of an antiquated term. Anyway, so that was my idea, which meant that I needed a different structural approach for every single chapter. And at a certain point, I had exhausted first person, third person, wildly omniscient narrators. I'd done a celebrity profile for one chapter. I'd written a chapter in second person. I had tried things that hadn't worked, epic poetry, drama, those didn't work. So I was casting about for other ways to tell stories, and I was intrigued by PowerPoint, although it took me quite a while to find something that would require telling in that way. It's a very sweet family story that I think would read very sentimentally if it were written in a conventional way, but PowerPoint is so cold and corporate that it creates a kind of cold envelope for all that sweetness, so hopefully it doesn't, overwhelm the reader. The other thing about PowerPoint, it's very hard to convey action. It's a very atomized form. It's a slideshow. In that chapter, you may notice almost nothing happens. I don't think I could have gotten away with it in any other way.
As you were writing it, did you have an inkling that it was going to be something special, or did you have no idea?
The opposite. I mean, what I knew was that it was going to be very hard to categorize. I knew it wasn't really a novel, conventionally speaking. It wasn't exactly a story collection. I know from experience that often counts against a book. It's very hard to describe the book. I mean, if I said, what is it about? Where would you start? That piecemeal quality makes it very hard to categorize and to create a little soundbite for. So my sense was that it would be a very quiet publication, because I knew from experience that would probably count against it in the marketplace. So I had very modest hopes, honestly. I would often think, well, if I can just hold my own with this, the next one will really be my commercial book. So it's, life is surprising that way.
Now, most of the characters in the book are linked to the music industry. Have you got experience of that world?
the opposite. As a journalist, I always wanted to get an assignment in the music industry, and I never could get one. So I think I had this long-standing craving to really learn about the industry, and I could never get anyone to pay me to do it. So I finally just did it on my own. Also, it's really a book about time, and time, very inspired by Proust. And time and music are very intertwined, I think, in most of our lives, and certainly in Proust's novel. Music has a way of moving us through time, and especially into our own pasts. I think it like almost nothing else. I mean, listening to an old song can literally transport one into an earlier moment. So the two worked, I think, together in the book.
So as a big fan of music, if you could go on the road or have a little bit of life, a little chapter in the music industry, who would you go on the road with? Which band?
Well, I think I'd have to turn back the clock to The Who, circa 1975, and go on tour with them and hopefully marry Roger Daltrey, which was really my goal. I don't know. I don't really have that kind of groupie impulse anymore. For me, that was really part of like the teenage years. I also was a huge Iggy Pop fan. I never mentioned The Who in Goon Squad because the kids I write about only like punk rock and they actually hate 60s music, but I really loved it. But Iggy Pop is in the book, and I actually quote from a song of his, and I was a huge fan of his. I mean, there was no one like him live on stage. And what I love is he's still out there doing it. I mean, these 60s and 70s musicians have had more staying power, at least the ones who survived, than I think we could ever have imagined.
Give us a clue then. You talked about a book you're writing now. What's the subject?
Well, I'm actually working on two. One is actually will incorporate Black Box, and I'm interested because Black Box involves a character from Goon Squad. I follow her into the 2030s, so further into the future. She's a peripheral character in Goon Squad. I love the thought of actually following that network of characters into some other kind of new book. But the goal will be to use the same methodology, this piecemeal methodology with very different approaches to narrative, to tell hopefully a different story. I don't want it to be another book about time and music, but I wonder whether I can employ the same methodology and arrive in a very different place. So that one will have the more unconventional writing, I think. And then the other is a historical novel set in New York in the 30s and 40s. That's the one that refuses to be unconventional so far, although maybe it has some surprise it's going to unleash on me. And that one has a sort of noirish mystery feeling to it, at least so far.
Sound good, don't they? Jennifer Egan there, talking to our own Eve Jackson. Now, let's move on to cinema, in fact, and Dracula, the vampire that we know and fear, has a different hat, or should I say cape on, for this blockbuster animation. The director of Dexter and Star Wars, Genndy Tartakovsky, has made him a dad. Adam Sandler voices the overprotective vampire, and Dracula's daughter is played by Selena Gomez. Well, Frans van Kat has been to meet the director in Dracula's castle.
In the depths of the forests of Transylvania, on the top of a cliff, sits Dracula's castle.
Welcome to Transylvania!
For his first animation film, Genndy Tartakovsky has created an endearing monster worried about his daughter Mavis's future. This Dracula is a far cry from a bloodthirsty creature. Rather, he's a good old dad that's decided to invite the most famous of monsters to his little girl's birthday party.
As a father, I thought that was the one take that I haven't really seen on Dracula that could be really interesting. Who's the most powerful, most charismatic monster, but he has a teenage daughter, and that's the most complicated in life.
Inspired by Bran Castle, the Hollywood director naturally wanted to screen his film in this mythical fortress, the perfect opportunity to adventure into the castle's secret passageways.
So this is the most amazing thing about the castle is that in our movie we have a scene where Dracula goes into the secret passageway, and we made this tunnel. And then when I got to the castle, I didn't even know that this existed, and it's exactly like what we have in the movie.
Ownership of the castle was returned to the royal family only a few years ago. Dracula's castle is the most visited tourist attraction in Romania. And even if Romanians never really believed in the legend, the vampire of the Carpathian Mountains is still one of Hollywood's favorite moneymakers.
Ship got exotic. Women tripping, come a whip hypnotic. Baby talk about ooh la la.
Looks fun, doesn't it? Good for the day after Halloween as well. That's the news from me. More coming up. Gina, you'll have the latest news after the break.